Welcome everyone to our panel discussion jointly hosted by Green Alliance and the Institution of Environmental Sciences. My name's Joseph, I'm policy lead at the IES, and I'll be hosting today's discussion. If you're attending today, you already know that building the workforce of the future will be a fundamental challenge, but hopefully you also recognise that it presents substantial opportunities. The net zero transition will require the delivery of green skills across education and the workforce at a considerable pace. So prioritising the right pathways will be crucial for urgent and effective implementation. In that context, today's discussion will bring together a number of recent developments which have expanded conversations about how we can deliver on the green skills agenda. In particular, Green Alliance's recent report, Green Shoots, Growing the Green Workforce of the Future, provides a crucial insight into how the UK can meet its green skills challenge and why action is needed. Green Shoots highlights the strong desire amongst young people to be part of the solution to climate change and the current skills challenge, amongst other things outlining some of the barriers and the need for more accessible pathways into green jobs. So today's event will begin with a presentation on that Green Alliance report by its primary author, Faustine Wheeler. Afterwards, we're going to hear from a selection of speakers, all of whom have been involved in recent work on the green skills agenda. So hearing their perspectives will offer us an insight into how we can make rapid and evidence-led progress. First, we'll hear from Josh Oxby, Energy Advisor at the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, or POST, will tell us about some of POST's recent work on green skills. Next, we'll hear from Ethny, Communities and Partnerships Lead at the IES, who will talk about the role of skills in the institution's recent horizon scanning and foresight work on the future of environmental science. Then we'll hear from Siobhan Silas, Senior Policy and Public Affairs Executive at the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, on how some of these challenges are playing out for environmental health and the green workforce. And finally, we'll hear from Sarah Ridgeon, Policy and Communities of Practice Officer at Society for the Environment, reflecting on some of the hard evidence coming out of the Society for the Environment's recent research on green skills. So those short presentations will set us up for a panel discussion and an opportunity for questions from the audience. For now, though, thank you for logging in. I'd like to start by introducing Faustine Wheeler, primary author of Green Shoots, who's going to get us started on today's discussion. Faustine's a former policy advisor in the economy theme at Green Alliance and lead author of the Green Shoots report. In previous roles, she worked as a youth coach and is passionate about using outdoor sports as a means of engaging communities with environmental issues. And she's going to be starting us off today. So, Faustine, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Joseph. Perfect. So, yeah, as Joseph mentioned, this presentation is going to touch on some of the key insights from Green Alliance's recent Green Shoots report. And this explored kind of ways to help young people from marginalized backgrounds enter into green jobs. So to start off with, the government has a real challenge on its hands when it comes to net zero and skills. According to the Climate Change Coalition, the net zero transition is expected to create between 135,000 and 725,000 net new jobs across all skill levels. So in order to meet this demand, we're going to need new entrants to the workforce, as well as reskilling current workers. However, the UK is already experiencing a tight labour market with skill shortages across all sectors needed to meet net zero. Those sectors with the most pressing need for emissions reductions, such as transport and buildings, are facing the most immediate skills challenges. While the UK has bodies like the Green Job Delivery Group, there's no comprehensive workforce development plan, and training options to allow people to gain green skills and employments do exist, but the landscape is very complex and fragmented. Experts have warned that skills could be a greater constraint than a lack of capital in holding back the net zero transition. This presentation is going to focus on entry-level green jobs, but before I kind of launch into it, I thought it's worth giving some definitions of these two terms. So as I'm sure we'll discuss later in our panel discussion, green jobs can be defined in a variety of different ways, but we decided to use the Green Jobs Delivery Group definition, which is employment and activity that directly contributes to or indirectly supports the achievement of the UK's net zero emission target and helps mitigate climate risk. Entry-level jobs we've defined as jobs that can be performed with minimal prior education or experience, and that act as that entry-level point into that higher skilled, higher paid work. And some examples of entry-level green jobs might include nature restoration contractors, community engagement officers, repair cafe workers. So this chart on this slide is some analysis we did for a report with Catch-22, and it shows the additional entry-level green jobs that would be created in the UK by 2035. we split it across 3 sectors. So you'll see the yellow segment of the bar is the power sector. The blue bars are circular economy, and the orange bars are nature recovery. And we've also split it between government's decarbonisation scenario, kind of lining up with their 2035 decarbonisation targets, and a more ambitious scenario that we've kind of called the alternative scenario. And our analysis found that between 120,000 and 160,000 additional entry-level green jobs will be needed by 2035 to reach the government's net zero targets. And as the graph shows, these will be distributed across all regions of the UK, with some, like the east of England and the southeast, benefiting more than others. In parallel to this green jobs gap, the UK has also struggled with high levels of young people who are not in employment, education, or training. So the ONS's latest estimates found that 12% of 16 to 24-year-olds were not in education, employment, or training. And out of this number, almost 300,000 were unemployed, which means they were actively looking for work. This is bad for the economy, and it's bad for the young people themselves. So the lifetime cost of a 16 to 18-year-old who is not in employment, education, or training to the Treasury is estimated at around £86,000 per person, and this almost doubles if the total cost of the economy, welfare loss to the individual and their family, and the opportunity to cost to the rest of society are taken into account. There's also significant cost to the individual, so spending time unemployed under the age of 23 has been found to lower life satisfaction, health status, job satisfaction, and wages up to 20 years later. In our conversations we've had with employers over all of our green skills work, we've also heard time and again that many employers don't feel like young people have the correct skills needed to succeed in green jobs, and this applies even to graduate and postgraduate students. The COVID pandemic has also kind of heightened the issue with the skills gap by causing interruptions in education and employment, and these have particularly hit young people from marginalized backgrounds. And to add to all this, young people are also experiencing very high rates of climate anxiety. So almost 1 in 3 young people surveyed by the Woodland Trust reported that they were very worried about climate change. So polling commissioned by multiple different organizations has time and again found that young people are generally very keen to go into green jobs, but those from marginalized backgrounds in particular face barriers. And I won't go through all of these on the slide, but I'll just mention a few. So cost, even if kind of training is free and young people are able to claim like a maintenance load or benefits whilst they're undergoing training, it does incur additional costs, which might be a barrier. So this could include work clothes, access to a digital device, and access to stable internet. And then concerns around job security were flagged quite highly in some polling that Public First did for Green Alliance a while back. And these are particularly high amongst young people from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And the environmental sector really has this reputation as a sector that pays low wages, has insecure contracts, and poor opportunities for progression, which can be a big barrier for many young people. There's also physical access challenges. So many of these jobs might be located in areas that are difficult to reach by public transport, or be located in kind of workplaces that aren't accessible for young people with disabilities. And then finally, low awareness. So polling has found time and again that young people are leaving school with very poor awareness of kind of what net zero is and what green jobs are and how they might be able to find kind of opportunities to gain the skills needed to enter into this sector. We also analysed current training pathways, and I have to say, while working in this section, I just found that while there is a lot of different ways to gain green skills, the landscape is very fragmented and quite difficult to navigate. So I've tried to break it down into 3 different pathways. The first of these is mainstream education. So that's kind of schools, education in further educational institutions such as colleges and higher education. And what we found is that while there is some attempt to kind of revamp curricula so that they touch more on environmental issues, this is really not being done at the pace needed. And a lot of young people are still leaving education with very poor understanding of the net zero transition and what a green job is. Colleges are a little bit ahead of the curve compared to schools, but again, there's just not enough green courses to meet the expected demand for entry-level green skills. The second pathway we looked at were apprenticeships, government-led programs such as the Lifetime Skills Guarantee and swaps, and employer-led schemes. And again, what we found with these is there's just insufficient green courses to meet expected demand. So there's only about 200 green apprenticeships. And the focus of these courses is very narrow. So they're helping people qualify for a certain job rather than giving them that kind of broad knowledge and those broad skills needed to enter into the workforce. And then finally, volunteering and internships have traditionally been a way for many young people to enter into the environmental sector, but these tend to be unpaid or low paid in nature and also very short term, which doesn't help with concerns around job security. However, in our research, we did find that alternative pathways into the sector do exist. And so we looked at two different models, which we've called the semi-funded work placement model. So that's the New to Nature example on the left, and then the civic service model, which is the California Conservation Corps example on the right. So just to give you a quick overview, New to Nature was a program offering 95 paid entry-level work placements in nature charities. And these placements were year-long and aimed at young people from ethnic minority backgrounds, low-income families, or those with disabilities, so kind of backgrounds that have traditionally been very underrepresented in the sector. Organizations were supported with funding so that they could create these new entry-level green jobs. So they were reimbursed up to 80 to 95% of the trainees' wages. And young people were given a variety of support over the course of the program. So kind of one-on-one mentoring, a personalized development plan, and targeted support. And the organizations who are hosting them were also given support in order to make their recruitment practices more inclusive. The program has been really successful. So 9 out of 10 trainees secured ongoing employment at the end of the program, and 8 out of 10 trainees have continued to work in the green sector, which is really positive. The other example we looked at, California Conservation Corps, is effectively a program that allows all young people in the state of California to undertake a year of service to the state. And this is particularly focused around kind of green jobs. So work includes emergency response, resource conservation, and then energy decarbonization and efficiency, such as kind of installing solar panels, electric vehicle charge points. The young people are paid, so they're provided with quite a generous stipend, which allows them to kind of devote the whole time to the program, and they're given numerous opportunities for development, and again, that one-on-one support, which is really important for those who might not otherwise be able to access these types of programs. So we looked at kind of what we might be able to propose government do based on these alternative pathways to support more young people into the sector in order to close that green skills gap, but also help reduce youth unemployment. And kind of we decided that it would be good to combine elements from both of those case studies I just went through. So we proposed the government put in place a semi-funded green job work placement scheme aimed at all 16 to 24-year-olds to the UK. And this would provide year-long roles in green sector organisations spanning the charity sector, public sector, and private sector. To reduce costs, this could originally be piloted at areas with higher proportions of young people who are not in education, employment, or training. And there would also need to be dedicated funding for outreach activities. So people could go into schools, colleges, community organizations to raise awareness of green jobs and of this program, and also liaise with careers counsellors and job centres to make sure that they're aware that this program is available to young people. And simultaneously to that, we also recommended that government launch a green jobs campaign. So there's already a website run by DEFRA, I think, listing kind of different green jobs and training opportunities. But this should be expanded to more traditional forms of advertising like billboards, TV advertising, radio, that sort of thing. So to really raise awareness of green jobs and what opportunities are available to young people. So I hope, yeah, this whistle stop tour has been interesting. And we really think our proposal goes quite a long way towards addressing that youth employment issue, as well as going some way towards closing the green skills gap. So thanks, and I'll hand back over to Joseph.
Thank you, Faustine, for what was a great presentation. In particular, I was really struck by that analysis on the scale of the transition required and some of those barriers, particularly around training pathways, just how much we need to achieve, but actually also a real sense of how much we can achieve as well, actually, through some of those practical case studies and that proposal at the end for government. So absolutely do check out the report, and very much worth reading it in a little bit more detail as well. But now that Faustine set the scene for us, I'd like to start bringing in some additional perspectives, starting with our panel of speakers. But as we continue, our next speaker is going to be Josh Oxby. Josh is the Energy Advisor for the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, or POST, supporting the select committees of both Houses of Parliament. He ensures that the best available energy research evidence and information is brought to bear on legislative processes and scrutiny of government. He has extensive international experience as a former IEA people-centered analyst and continues to consult as their global occupations and skills expert, following his contributions to the World Energy Outlook 2023 and the World Energy Employment Outlook 2023. So Josh, over to you.
Fantastic. So thank you all for having us here today. Just a quick overview and a quick bit of housekeeping before I get going about what our work has been, our recent developments have been on green skills. So within POST, the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, we have 4 key divisions of covering an entire array of sections and subsections. So primarily we have biological sciences and health, we have physical and digital sciences, environment and energy, and social sciences, all of which are supported by our knowledge exchange unit. All in all, there are 16 of us working sort of around the clock to support the outputs of the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and select committees. And it's just to also make that clear distinction that although we sit across both the Commons and Lords, we are distinctly separate from government, whilst our work sort of helps feed in to support their work. Sort of we, as a bicameral body, try to present the most unbiased and stakeholder-informed outlooks as possible. So as a result, technically we have no official opinions or recommendations, as we are purely evidence-based. That being said, we do collate sort of all manner of opinions and perspectives from private sector, public sector, third sector, youth, charities, experts in their own field, academia, really just to inform our decisions and our outputs. So most recently, back in January 2024, in an update to a previous note we did in 2021, we published our most recent sort of re-review of green skills in education and employment. So whilst I know we've just covered an awful lot on sort of the work on green skills and sort of the work that the Green Alliance have done, this is just a real whistle-stop overview of sort of the key outputs that we were hearing from industry stakeholders. So as I'm sure we all know, green skills are often associated with green jobs, and that tends to be the way in which we quantify and measure them. Although alongside that, there do come a number of issues when we're sort of coupling sort of skills and occupations together, as you know, there are different ways, different measures, different definitions, as we have adopted the one by the European Centre of Development and Vocational Training, which is slightly different to the UK government's one, just given the scope and openness to this one. So in our report, we have looked more so at the broader scope and the knowledge, the abilities, the values and attitudes needed to live in and develop and support society, as opposed to just considering it in the UK context on the whole. And again, we have found as well that green skills as a term has become more of a buzzword used by policymakers, as opposed to those industry stakeholders who are less involved and engaged with policy itself. So ultimately, there there do come these issues, and that we have found time and time again with how we measure and attempt to quantify skills, because more often than not, we are associating them to the jobs themselves as opposed to, say, the cognitive, the metacognitive, sort of the more holistic skills themselves. So ultimately, having adapted sort of some of the work by leading academics in the field, so we've proposed sort of three or four sort of key different understandings of green skills, ranging from transformative skills to instrumental skills. So it's looking at green skills in terms of holistic systems thinking, sort of coalition building, all the way up to sort of, the practical quantifiable jobs that we're seeing already. So be it in engineering, science and science skills, sort of STEM skills, etc. But ultimately as well, as we're doing this holistic overview in the round, we are noticing that there are going to be significant skills gaps and risks as we are sort of going through this net zero transition, skills shortages, as well as skills mismatching, sort of as sort of three key sort of areas to overcome. So in terms of routes for green skills development, it goes without saying, but we've identified four primary routes for the skills developments themselves. This isn't to say that there aren't more, but just hearing back and what was reflected from us, from our key stakeholders, we were sort of hearing that upskilling, be it within private sector, public sector, or sort of pre-established frameworks that are in place, sort of are the key way that we are anticipating sort of a much larger influx of green skills to be developed. So by 2030, we're already anticipating 80% of the workforce to be in employment, and thus it's going to enable a green skills transition sort of be a lot more cleaner, effective, well delivered. Sort of if we are to prioritize an upskilling, be this through government incentivized schemes or in-house private training schemes. Our second one was vocational education and training. So these can be done through apprenticeships, higher technical qualifications, and they ultimately, we found, provide a real entry-level route into key sectors, sort of in these key sectors that we are seeing and anticipating to have the most impact sort of on net zero and green industrial transitions. The third one is higher education and going to universities, and we're already seeing that an awful lot of key stakeholders are already incorporating climate literacy into their curricula, which is also feeding into schools and at school level. So it's one of these four aspects that we found that schools on the whole, stakeholders might overlook, but we are now seeing that as climate literacy is coming into universities as well, it's beginning to sort of integrate slowly into the school system as well. So it's actually considering the long-term role of teaching skills sort of from the beginning of your educational training prior to going to any higher education, vocational education, apprenticeships, whatnot. We're seeing this is having a massive impact sort of on the incoming workforce and those sort of developing sort of their skills, their attributes, their ability for critical analytical thinking. It's making a massive difference already, sort of from such sort of fundamental foundational ages. But again, as I said, we did find as well that there were a number of challenges for green skills and their development. And again, I do need to stress that these are quite generic and specific to the UK context itself, whilst we're not saying that other countries such as Europe, India, North America don't have their own unique ones. Given the scope of focus of our work and the fact that we are bound to ensuring that we are reflective of the views and what's taking place in the UK on the whole, so we are more reflexive of what we are seeing in the demographics. So ultimately, one of the key issues and challenges that we've heard time and time again has been the aging out of workforces, and the fact that a number of these sort of sunset jobs sort of in non-renewable sectors right now, the proportion of workers are largely older, and the number of people that are approaching retirement age, there is a reticence to actually undertake sort of retraining and upskilling sort of courses themselves. So we're seeing that this is going to have a massive impact on the future of decarbonizing key sectors themselves. We're also finding that sort of international talent attraction is also having an impact on the development of the green skills themselves, as well as the future of the green skills workforce. So not only are sort of UK immigration rules sort of having an impact on our ability to attract international talent, but we're also finding that sort of the work that the US and the EU are doing, sort of in the exploration of net zero technologies into sort of key sectors, are actually taking away talent from the UK workforce itself. So it's a bit of a two-pronged sword here of not only are we struggling to attract talent, but then our own homegrown talent is also being attracted away from us. Another issue that we are finding in demographics comes down to the gender dimension of sort of the demographics. So predominantly, we are seeing that in key decarbonisation sectors, sort of the majority are male and they are white. And in fact, sort of in 2018, women only constituted 22% of STEM workforce and 8% of skilled trades themselves. So we are seeing a massive gender imbalance, gender disparity taking place, as well as around sort of the education and the training side of things as well. Going back to what we just said prior as well, we are seeing that young people, specifically from low-income backgrounds, who are most likely to consider apprenticeships, are still facing significant barriers to entry into the job market itself. So not only are they struggling, be it with their ability to undertake education training or to have access to funding and finance for this, there are significant barriers of underlying this a whole lot more. And this ties in quite nicely then also with the geographical sort of differences. And in this instance, we've focused in on the rural counties facing distinct decarbonisation challenges, be it accessibility to attend training, lack of grid connections, sort of population fluxes and tourism, workforce gaps. Ultimately, there are a number of key sort of demographic barriers that are limiting our ability to enable sort of really effective and affirmative green skill development programs. And of course, this then also ties in nicely with the training that we're talking about. So it's not only to do with the social stigmas surrounding perception of vocational educational training as compared to a university degree. Sort of some stakeholders were suggesting that this has a lower visibility and prestige as an academic pathway compared to going to university. Whilst, of course, as we all know, VETs, they can be specifically targeted and then enable a real niche skill set to be developed that is going to be required sort of for the future of the workforce itself. And of course, we then find issues alongside that with the quality of the training and the training providers themselves. So it's not only having issues surrounding the definition of green skills and how we are approaching this, but it's also workers themselves not only are finding the incentive to retrain and reskill a real issue, but they find it difficult to actually dedicate the time to invest in training in green skills themselves, as if we're considering it from the stance of an engineer, sort of someone that is already fitting boilers. It's going to be very difficult for them to justify taking time out of their diary to then spend 2-3 hours a week sort of retraining, reskilling for the future of the technology in the sector itself. So ultimately, as I stressed earlier on in post, we have no recommendations or advice as a department, but what we can offer is policy considerations that have been informed by you, our key stakeholders. So what we have seen is that sort of in order to achieve our net zero targets, we're going to require significant changes to 20% of the existing workforce. But there are these massive time delays between identifying the skills needs, the skills gaps, and then ensuring that we are training a competent workforce in the long run. So what we have found sort of from our feedback is that the stakeholders suggest that public procurement of goods and services with reduced environmental impacts sort of may help to drive the demand for green skills and promote the quality of jobs. So it's not only just developing frameworks sort of and having ongoing collaborations and working with stakeholders and government, but it's also ensuring that we can build effective capacity in local authorities that really allows us to align with our national, our regional, sort of our overarching global targets, sort of to really tackle this green energy transition and sort of workforce transformation on the whole. So that's essentially sort of just the quick overview of what we've done in post, really trying to make green skills accessible sort of to you, our stakeholders, and to everyone else.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Josh. That was a great presentation. I think you definitely hit the access part of that really well. I think also that perspective around sort of the interplay between skills and jobs is a really crucial lens. I like how you laid out how some of, sort of the risks associated with that result then in some of those sort of key sectors and challenges. So it's a really helpful context for the discussion. But our next speaker is my IES colleague, Ethny Childs. Ethny's Communities and Partnerships Lead at the IES and co-author of Transforming the Planet, Our Vision for the Future of Environmental Science. She also co-led the Horizon Scanning and Foresight project that produced that report. Day to day, Ethny is responsible for supporting the IES communities and building relationships with partners and stakeholders in the sector. Ethny is a trustee for Charity Works, sits on the Silk Board and holds positions on the steering groups for the Professional Bodies Climate Action Charter, the Equator Programme and the Western Communicating Climate Programme. So Ethny, over to you.
Amazing. Thanks, Joseph. Thank you. Great. So I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you about the important topic of green skills. As all of our speakers have already gone over, how you define that is always quite a tough question. And so for this presentation, I'm going to be considering green skills in quite a broad context. And I'm going to be talking about the skills mix that will be needed in the environment sector to support a just transition and to effectively address the interlinked issues of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. So to address this topic, as Joseph mentioned, I'm going to be using the findings from the IES's year-long Horizon Scanning and Foresight project, which we completed at the end of last year, and which culminated in the publication of Transforming the Planet, Our Vision for the Future of Environmental Sciences. After my presentation, I'll pop a link into the report if anyone's interested to find out a bit more. But to provide a bit of background on this project, it brought together the environmental science community to discuss key factors influencing the sector, and it provided a forum for discussion around what the future of environmental science should look like and how we can actually get there. Over the course of the year, we delved into 5 key themes to frame these conversations. So we looked at things like megatrends, the evolving nature of science, the regulatory landscape, the changing workforce, and the day-to-day jobs of environmental scientists. And we did do extensive engagement with stakeholders across the sector. So over 30 different organisations were involved. We had more than 20 dedicated events with over 80 contributors and actually over 850 attendees across all those events. So some really great engagement there. From those discussions, we then did theme mapping to delve further into the findings. So you can see a picture of this on the screen. Don't worry, you're obviously not expected to be able to read any of that. But to give you a bit of a flavour, we had 661 themes were mapped with over 1,300 connections identified between them. You will be relieved to know that I'm just going to focus on a really small part of this today, but needless to say, I am distilling quite a lot of information into a short presentation. So I would recommend you kind of read a bit more if you want to find out a bit more detail on this. So importantly, that theme mapping exercise that we did provided the foundation for our vision for the future of environmental science at the IES. This is one where environmental scientists are knowledgeable, skilled, diverse, trusted, and engaged in the process of transformation. It is one where people have access to the relevant science to help them solve environmental challenges and co-create a sustainable society where people and nature thrive. And as you can see, central to this vision is that word skills. As a professional body, we know that skills and competence are fundamental to improving our sector and addressing environmental crises effectively. So let me now delve into what we mean by skills in this context. And I'm going to just really briefly talk about 4 key categories of skills that we think and that all our stakeholder engagement said are needed to deliver this vision. And it really should be noted that when I talk about these skills, I'm covering the skills mix that's needed in the sector. So it can't be expected that each professional, of course, holds all of these skills. But it's important that the sector and project teams have access to a mix of these. So first up, I'm going to talk about enabling skills. If we're going to deliver integrated solutions to environmental and social issues, which a lot of us know is important, enabling skills are absolutely key. So these are really needed to support the effective translation of environmental science into action. So it's really about helping environmental scientists to act as agents of change in society. Enabling skills by their nature are varied, so they'll depend on the specifics of the work. They include things like science communication skills, skills in innovation, critical thinking, leadership, collaboration. So they're those real foundational skills that can bridge gaps both between stakeholders and also between specialisms and disciplines as well. I also wanted to highlight process literacy, which is another important one here. And that really refers to skills in understanding that policy-public science interface and how it can be influenced to drive change. Of course, these enabling skills must go hand in hand with technical skills. So this is really the bread and butter of environmental scientists' work. And just to paint a picture of the demand, we've already talked a little bit about this, but between 2022 and 2023, one study showed that job postings requiring green skills rose by more than 20% in that time. And this growth really indicates the increasing demand for these technical skills in the sector. An interesting way in which some of these skills needs are changing, however, and we've alluded to this a little bit, is around how they are framed. So there is a focus on things on sustainability and solutions-led science, which is leading to a demand in skills that are really driven by those challenge areas. So things like water management, regenerative agriculture, biodiversity net gain, natural capital, all of that type of stuff, net zero skills as well, as we've already talked about. So of course, I won't be able to go over all of the technical skills that are needed, as they're so wide ranging, but I did want to take just a quick moment to delve into net zero skills specifically, and some of the key priority skills in this area, because that's a really good way of highlighting both the mix needed of technical and enabling skills. So in terms of technical skills, things that were particularly picked out as priorities in our project were skills related to carbon accounting and reporting. It's an increasingly sought after skills with the rise in reporting requirements related to GHG emissions and sustainability more broadly as well. This needs to go hand in hand with wider carbon management skills. So they're a massive priority to support organisations, not just in reporting and measuring their emissions, but actually in developing plans and strategies for reducing them and reaching their net zero targets. And this means that they will need access to a wide range of related skills in things like energy efficiency, waste management, and supply chain management, all of those types of things. And of course, climate risk management skills will be of paramount importance to support adaptation and resilience measures. And then in terms of enabling skills, things like climate communications with different stakeholders, supporting policy development and implementation, and also those social science skills to support behaviour change and strategy development skills as well. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but it does highlight the different types of green skills needed just within the area of net zero. And then we're going to talk about two other types of skills just to finish off the presentation. So these are ones that are really needed to support those enabling and technical skills. So first we have digital skills. It really goes without saying that technological development will continue to have a profound impact on the world of work. The environmental sector will need those with skills in managing new technologies and digital workspaces, as well as the vast environmental data sets they are unlocking. Technological development supporting real-time environmental monitoring, augmented reality, digital twins, all of these are going to require a digitally skilled and literate workforce. And a key area that's really of importance in the sector is the innovation that has revolutionized the way that we collect, curate, analyze, and visualize data. So environmental professionals will really need skills related to all of to handling those big data sets. Finally, it will come as no surprise to hear that at the IES that the fourth key skill area needed in the sector is system thinking skills. As I've mentioned already, environmental scientists are being increasingly consulted to develop integrated solutions to environmental challenges. And to effectively do this, they need to be upskilled in system thinking principles to really support the development of those multifunctional solutions. This requires specialist knowledge of environmental systems and how they interact, but also a broad understanding of the social and economic systems in which they operate. And managing this complexity is going to be a key need for future environmental scientists. And in the face of these environmental crises, supporting that adaptive capacity in society will be vital. And that really means that environmental scientists need skills in things like solutions options engineering to support evidence-based decision-making. So systems thinking as well is also really tied up with interdisciplinarity. So skills in working across disciplines will be fundamental. So how do we actually support the growth in these green skills that we've talked about? We'll really need a concerted effort across stakeholders to meet the demand for green skills and equip our workforce. From our project, headlines from our engagement talked about these four key areas. So we've got the environment sector, which really needs to develop training to support environmental scientists as agents of change and provide those enabling technical, digital, and systems thinking skills. Learning providers need to think about how they can support interdisciplinary systems thinking, enabling skills, and really develop those new technical pathways, which Josh talked a bit about. Professional bodies need to think about how they can develop comprehensive industry recognised training and guidance on priority skills area. And then the government can get involved by thinking about skills audits of the professions and wider stakeholders, which can really support those sectoral transition pathways aligned with a sustainable future. So, of course, this has just been a real whistle-stop tour of the findings of our project and the key priority areas for green skills, but I really hope it's underlined the vital need to actually equip environmental professionals with skills to address environmental challenges, drive change, and achieve a positive future where people and nature can thrive. Thanks very much, and happy to take questions at the end.
Thank you, Ethny, for what was a great presentation. I know that element around the science workforce will be of particular interest to some of our attendees, and I think you did a great job of placing that in the wider context of the transition as a whole, and also in terms of the role that scientists can play as change agents and how sort of each of those categories of skills helps that happen. Next up, we're going to hear from Siobhan Silas. Siobhan is a Senior Policy and Public Affairs Executive at CIEH, whose role involves spearheading efforts to raise the profile of environmental health and influencing policy to tackle the key challenges at the forefront of the environmental health workforce. We're told that having worked on the green skills transition in her previous role, Siobhan is looking to reveal how a career in environmental health is not only rewarding and essential, but how environmental health professionals are a core part of an existing and future green workforce. So all of that said, Siobhan, over to you.
Thanks for that. And yeah, thank you very much for all the presentations that have gone before me. I'm here, I guess, to take a slightly different angle to the green skills discussion. I think we often talk about green skills and green jobs as an emerging topic and something that we're aspiring to define and create. And I think that, of course, that's going to happen as the climate emergency becomes increasingly urgent and as we have new net zero targets that are becoming increasingly close to delivering. But I think that's really critical to outline is that environmental health as a really key part of the workforce is something that has been delivering green skills for some time and also is going to perform a really key part of the future workforce. So I think it's really critical to outline where we have to go, but also take account of what green skills and green jobs we currently have and how we can continue to build on those. So I'm essentially saying that environmental health is the net zero workforce prototype, and that we can really draw a lot of inspirations from environmental health and the challenges that we're currently facing. So for a little bit more background, as Joseph outlined, I am the Senior Policy and Public Affairs Executive at the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, and we are a professional membership organization who represent around 7,000 environmental health professionals working across the disciplines. So we really provide that kind of professional voice for them and kind of take on a lot of our members' kind of key points and concerns. So as we've rightly seen from the Green Alliance report, the CCC has outlined that the net zero transition is going to create a whole host of new jobs as part of this green workforce. Now they have estimated that this can be anything from 100K to 700K by 2030. I think this really loose estimation in itself creates quite a lot of challenges, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. But I think it's really critical to outline that this kind of new green workforce isn't going to be just these new jobs. It's actually going to be requiring quite a lot of industries to transition and kind of change how they're working. So anyone who's working within oil and gas to transition to renewables, people working within petrol and diesel cars to go across to kind of electric vehicles. So we're really asking a lot of this wider workforce to transition and develop skills to do that, like carbon accounting and carbon literacy. And of course, alongside that and behind this green workforce, the rest and the majority of the workforce is going to have indirect impacts from the net zero transition. And again, we'll need to adapt their skills and how they work in regards to a changing climate. But a profession that necessarily isn't going to be a new entrant and isn't going to have to do a massive change in how they're working is environmental health. So we define green skills, and I know that everyone on the call has said that there is some different ways to define green skills. That in itself is a weakness in this discussion because we're having a lack of coherence and understanding of that. And I think that we at the Chartered Institute are someone that definitely recognizes that and obviously isn't coming with a solution. But in kind of a nutshell, green skills are the knowledge and abilities to support a sustainable and resource efficient society. And in a nutshell, that is what environmental health does. So environmental health really seeks to strengthen the relationship between humans and all the external factors from the environment that affect our well-being. And it covers around 7 disciplines. So from public health, environmental protection, food safety, health and safety, and port health. So really a wide kind of spread of topic areas. So innately, environmental health embodies a lot of those enabling and technical skills that Ethny outlined. So things like systems thinking, public protection, regulatory compliance, and also that really big piece around science communication and behavior change. Now, of course, environmental health professionals are going to have to increasingly change and adapt these skills in terms of technical developments and how regulatory compliance is changing. But really crucially, they embody a lot of those skills quite innately. Environmental health professionals has also been at the forefront of the climate adaptation and mitigation for decades. So as we've had regulatory compliance, environmental health professionals have not only been at the forefront of implementing those, so implementing things like air quality targets, being able to implement things around electric vehicle chargers, water pollution, noise pollution, but really critically, they're that one step ahead because they inform a lot of legislation that we have around net zero targets. And they work within those kind of key sectors that are the ones that most need to kind of transition over. So that's in transport, public housing, and health. So environmental health professionals are really critical because they are allowing to protect against those unintended consequences that we can see arise from climate adaptation and mitigation. So hydroelectric power can create unintended consequences for water and soil, and hydrogen combustion can create unintended consequences for noise pollution and air pollution. So environmental health professionals have been able to see, I guess, that holistic view. And I think that, I guess, a problem that we always have in green skills is that we sometimes refer to it purely as an ecological crisis, and it really spans wider health and how we interact with our goals and our targets. So environmental health has that really critical aim to be able to kind of see a holistic change and implement a lot of these targets from the get-go. So if we're saying that environmental health embodies a lot of the green skills that we're seeking to achieve and is a really core part of our traditional and future green workforce, a central challenge that we're facing in terms of skills is that we're actually facing a recruitment and retention crisis. So we know that a lot of EHPs have the skills that we need, and of course we'll need to develop these, but we just don't have enough EHPs within local authorities and local government. So we had a workforce survey in 2021, and this found that 4 out of 5 local authorities reported that they use agency staff to deliver environmental health services. So that means that we're not necessarily getting everybody into these roles that we can. And this has a knock-on effect in terms of what skills we require environmental health professionals to need. So we've got kind of reflections from our members that they're being required to develop a lot more wide skills. So if we have an EHP that would like to work purely within water quality or purely within food, kind of sustainability, they're being forced to almost become, like Ethny, as you described, that catch-all professional. So really having to develop that wide range of skills that is unattainable for one person to have to do. And of course, this then creates an issue for retention if we're being asked for these individuals to kind of create a lot of burden on them. We've also seen that local authorities don't have the capacity to support the training of a new generation of EHPs. So in 2019 to 2020, 2/3 of local authorities failed to take on an apprentice, which is obviously a really critical role to get people into the profession. And this is something that we really wanted to flag as well. Now, within this kind of survey, we found that the major reasons for this workforce crisis was firstly that local authorities have a lack of funding and capacity and people in order to get upskilling for people, in order to ensure that they can have apprentices come in. And secondly, that there is a lack of awareness of environmental health within this green workforce. Now, we've seen from that Green Alliance report that, promisingly, a lot of young people are seeking green jobs and green skills, and we're not seeing that people are understanding what these look like on the ground. So that definition of green jobs in terms of supporting how we interact with the environment, in terms of delivering net zero kind of goals, that as a tangible definition seems to not necessarily translate to what this means on the ground. So a lot of young people don't necessarily see that environmental health is part of the green workforce. They may not necessarily understand that it is part of a wider green workforce or wider public health workforce. And for us, that was a really major kind of part of work that we now want to start to do. So I guess for kind of the path ahead from CIEH, we're really calling upon the government and policymakers to begin to invest and recognize the importance of environmental health as a really key frontline workforce. We've seen this throughout the pandemic, that environmental health professionals were at the forefront of delivering against this. They're now at the forefront of delivering all of the climate targets that we currently have, but they need to have the resources to be able to do that, to be able to upskill as new kind of technological developments continue to increase, and to ensure that they really have the support to then support new AHOs coming in. We've also looked at the Green Alliance's nationwide Green Jobs Work Placement Scheme. Interestingly, a lot of the case studies that we saw were people going in to do a lot of environmental health related roles. So we really want to ensure that we can understand that, connect those roles to what environmental health actually is, and can make that connection. We're also calling upon ourselves and our partners to raise awareness of the crucial role of environmental health, and also to raise the accessibility and inclusivity of our pathways. So CIEH have just started a workforce satellite project, and this is really going to be looking at the kind of public health protection that environmental health provides, to kind of convince policymakers of why to invest within environmental health, and also to develop a lot of careers material and work to ensure that anyone who does want to get into environmental health, not only as a young person, but as someone who wants to become a career changer, can. And that's something that we really want to strike a balance on. Although young people are the future of our workforce, 80% of the workforce of 2030 is already working, and we want to ensure that we can definitely support those individuals already within environmental health and anyone who wants to kind of change over. So that is our path for the way ahead, and it does prove promising, but yeah, definitely some way to go.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Siobhan, for your insightful presentation. I really like that framing at the start about the existing workforce, and I think your presentation really championed the role of environmental health and EHPs in the transition. And then that analysis for the challenges facing the sector and even some solutions as well. So our final panelist is going to be Sarah Ridgeon. Sarah is Policy and Communities of Practice Officer at Society for the Environment, or SOCENV, which is an umbrella body responsible for championing and registering environmental professionals. Sarah's role involves leading SOCENV's climate, special interest group and policy-centred projects, including coordinating the Collaborative Environmental Policy Forum, the EPF. So Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Joseph, and thank you for the invitation to speak today, and to the other presenters for their insights so far. It's been really interesting. So as Joseph said, I'm speaking today on behalf of the Society for the Environment, or SOCENV, and also on behalf of the Environmental Policy Forum, which, as Joseph mentioned, is a collaborative forum. So it brings together 13 professional bodies across sectors to influence government policy. And SOCENV are the secretariat of the EPF, with the IES and CIEH, two of my fellow presenters today, two of the other bodies involved, but also we have IEMA, SAIEM, SAIWEM, etc. involved in the forum as well. So with that quick intro done, today I'm going to briefly cover two research projects which relate to green skills. So one is conducted by SOCENV and the other collectively as part of the EPF. So the challenges and solutions arising from these projects align largely with those of the Green Alliance report and the other presentations that have happened today. But I think the two projects have specific focuses and samples and audiences that the research projects involved, which mean that they hopefully, add extra value to today's discussions as well. So firstly, just to explain a bit more about the EPF research project. So this was conducted last year and featured original research via a survey. And the research was carried out of professional bodies and learned societies across a range of different sectors. So why did we choose these audiences? Because of the knowledge that these bodies have of their professions via their members who are the experts, and also their knowledge and engagement in the skills and CPD space as well. So as mentioned, the EPF itself has a cross-sector reach, but the survey really enabled us to gain the insights of sectors outside of the EPF remit as well. So for example, engineering and finance. What did the survey find? So essentially, there was strong evidence across the board, both research and anecdotal, of skills gaps and shortages, including specialist skills, with awareness of and route into green jobs proving especially challenging. Meanwhile, the SOCENV research project is pretty much hot off the press, having been completed a matter of weeks ago. So this project involved both original research via interviews and a kind of evidence review mapping existing research, with the focus aim of identifying the alignment of technician roles specifically with professional development opportunities. So this involved a deep dive into the state of technician roles, but within the wider green jobs context as well. So this project found similar challenges as the EPF project, with regards to limited awareness of green jobs, even when enthusiasm for green jobs is present, which was something that was touched on earlier, and also barriers to opportunity. So with the particular focus on technician roles, it noted challenges in access to apprenticeships, low diversity in the workforce, which was something again mentioned earlier, and also limited knowledge of T levels as just some of the challenges that we're facing. So in terms of the solutions suggested by respondents, which then led into the research recommendations, both projects emphasised the importance of two main strands. So the first one being awareness. So this really emphasised a sort of lifelong learning, that this needs to be at all education levels. But in terms of particularly reaching out to teachers, careers advisors and students, improving the awareness of green jobs. And this could be via presentations to schools, toolkits, helping with lesson plans, that sort of thing, creating resources to help with that. And the idea behind this is to, like I say, help improve knowledge of what green jobs are. And obviously, we've mentioned the kind of challenges that are involved with defining green jobs and agreeing a definition. This includes, obviously, what I said about technician roles in particular, and addressing negative perceptions of these roles. Also, and again, this was kind of touched on earlier, there's a need to agree messaging on the benefits of green jobs. So linking into what the Green Alliance report said around the Green Jobs campaign and information platform and the need for that. And then the second strand is around opportunity. So this is making sure there are routes for all into green jobs, improving the diversity, which is mentioned as a real problem. Research has found the environmental profession is the second least diverse in the UK. So it's a real big priority to improve those diversity levels. Also around incentives. So there's a lot of research showing financial incentives are really valuable in improving the take-up of green skills training. So this is something that came out of the EPF research. I know the post briefing touched on that as well, and many other research projects. Also, which has been talked about today, the need to invest in not only training, but quality training. And having those training providers and making sure that they're as robust as can be. And then also aligning roles with professional development pathways, so that there's a clear route for people, that they can see there's a clear route into a profession, and that the development opportunities on offer, including professional registration as well. And as is mentioned before, I think by Ethny, there's we're very clear on the role of many different people involved in this. So whether that's employers or professionals, professional bodies, government. So that sort of point around the need for policy certainty from government is something that came out very heavily in both research projects. Okay, so in terms of delivering on recommendations so far, so this slide focuses on the EPF project because, as I mentioned before, the SOCM project has only just finished, so there's not been time to deliver on the recommendations as yet. But the EPF project delivery so far has focused on two main areas. So the first one being sharing good practice between partners involved. So the partners involved are survey respondents, and then those who've reached out since the findings of the survey were published and really wanted to get involved. So this has been, this strand has been done in the knowledge that part of the challenge is addressing silos. So we know there's lots of great work that's being done to tackle the Green Skills Challenge, but sometimes it's there's not the awareness of this activity across the board, and sort of a knowledge that we don't want to duplicate activity where it's already existing, but sometimes people aren't aware that those initiatives already exist or those resources already exist. So there's that sort of side of things. And then the second key area that we've been working on is agreeing common policy asks, because obviously we're in election year. So as EPF, we've been developing an environmental priorities for the next government piece of work, and skills is one of the key cross-cutting asks in this piece of work. So at the moment, our three specific skills-related asks have been formed from the survey findings, and then also from follow-up calls with partners as well. So we've been trying to make sure they're as robust as possible, and they represent the views across the board, really. So these specific asks relate to ensuring buy-in from business for the forthcoming Green Jobs and Skills Charter for employers, So really that engagement between government and business, the business in terms of delivering is really important. The second specific ask is around offering financial incentives for training, as mentioned before, and the value of that. And then the third is around establishing a cross-government body focused on green skills to ensure joined up delivery, which is something that has been a priority for us, that we don't think that joint policy is currently joined up, and that there's a lack of alignment of policy between the various government departments, which should be addressed. And then going forward, there's obviously room to collaborate, resource dependent, on further mapping of the resources and opportunities, and producing toolkits for teachers, etc., which I mentioned before. So for us, really the key is collaboration, whether that's through SOCEMP or the EPF. That's kind of at the heart of what we do, and that's inherent in the recommendations, really. So yeah, that brings me to the end of my brief presentation. So thank you for listening, and looking forward to the Q&A.
Perfect. No, thank you, Sarah, for that excellent presentation. I think you gave us a really deep overview of some of those key action areas, and importantly, it's an evidence-led approach, which gives us some real insights into how we can actually tackle some of the challenges that we've been looking at all afternoon. And as we love to see, action's already underway. So now that we've heard from all of our speakers, we've got about 20 minutes for a Q&A session. So we'll be bringing the whole panel back in to answer your questions. And of course, also Faustine. As a reminder, if you have any questions, you can submit them in the Q&A box throughout, and we'll try and select some of the best questions to put to the panel. I think, given we've had it the whole time, it would be best if we start with Adam's question. I know some of you have reflected on that as we've been going through, but it takes us to the question of definitions. Whilst I think there's been sort of some defense of different definitions, I think my real question is, how can we link up across different definitions in order to make progress, even if there are people, for their own reasons, working on from slightly different perspectives? So Faustine, I'm going to come back to you in the first instance, but then maybe also we'll bring in Siobhan on this, because you had a slightly more holistic definition that does maybe what Adam's looking for, and then we'll see if anybody else wants to come in on that. So Faustine, do you want to start us off?
Sure, thanks, Joseph. Yeah, I think we use the Green Jobs Delivery Group definition just because there's so many different definitions available, and it's kind of broad enough to encompass like net zero and also kind of nature recovery. So a lot of the activities that are really pressing in addressing environmental concerns, but not so broad that it kind of loses meaning. But I think there is really the need for a recognition that kind of green skills are going to be needed across basically all jobs, especially if you have the whole economy-wide transition to net zero. And this means that kind of if you're thinking about education, there's really going to need to be better understanding of net zero and green skills kind of across the board.
Perfect, thank you. And Siobhan, did you want to come in on that as well then?
Yeah, because I think that brings up a really interesting point, is that from environmental health, we create quite a holistic approach. So environmental health has always been around like environmental conservation and nature recovery, and now net zero as we develop these targets. I think around that definition of green jobs and green skills, there is a need, I guess, to have a holistic understanding and then to break those down. I think we try and encompass so many jobs within kind of one headline definition. So you're covering things from entry-level jobs to things that are super specialized, to industries which maybe just need to adapt a few skills and need to transition. So I think there's possibly a need for a lot more coherence in how we talk about green jobs, and also then how we kind of define those section by section and stop trying to make, I guess, a one-fits-all approach, because then you get quite a woolly definition. I think thirdly, what's most critical is then ensuring that that definition can become quite tangible. So I think within environmental health, although we understand that a lot of young people will know kind of vaguely what a green job is, they don't necessarily see that within each industry. So they don't connect that to what a job looks like on the ground. So I think most importantly for the definition of green jobs is being able to actually witness what they look like on the ground. So being able to understand what that will look like sector by sector. So I think that will also help kind of increase that collective understanding.
Great, thank you both. So I'm going to bring in our next question at this point. So we've got a question from Kanan in the chat, which is talking around talking about ambiguity about some of the pathways around net zero. So Kanan says, currently it's not clear to date what the detail level techniques are going to be for achieving net zero. So what the pathways are actually going to be, and therefore it's difficult to identify what skills are needed for achieving what we want to achieve. So Conan wonders if we have any comments. I think, Josh, maybe we'll come to you first because you're used to condensing down these complex policy areas for decision makers. I wonder if you have any perspectives on how that affects our approach.
Yeah, so what I would say, so I wouldn't say it necessarily relates back to the work that we do in post, because in post we are more reiterating sort of the views of the panel, every panelist that's here today. I would say from experience at the OECD and the IEA in Paris, where we've taken that more holistic insight sort of from the top down level, we focus more so on not the specific skills, but the skills categories themselves. So whilst we were talking about some technical skills and all this, it's then also delving deep into sort of cognitive, metacognitive, transferable, transversal skills. So if we are doing some preliminary mapping on this, which I know organizations out in Europe, ONET, ONS in the UK, they are currently all doing this. It enables us to sort of make as well informed a decision as possible ahead of time. So it's not necessarily saying specifically we're going to need this skill, this precise green skill, but we can sort of begin to make informed decisions and outputs saying this generic skill category of cognitive, so ability for critical analytical thinking, sort of for more complex reasoning, sort of we're seeing a rise in this in our maps under these sort of different net zero pathways and outputs, so we can sort of start to make some more informed decisions without delving too deep on the specific skills themselves.
Thanks for that, Josh. And I wonder, Ethny, if maybe you have a perspective on this, because you've also, I mean, you've spent the last year engaged in the foresight world, so trying to answer exactly the question that Kanan's asking us for. But then you also presented on some of those category of skills. So I wonder if you've got a perspective here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Those specific skills to deliver net zero. I mean, from my perspective, net zero is going to look different in every sector and every job, really. But I think what we really need, and I mentioned it briefly in my presentation, are these sectoral transition pathways, because that's really going to be able to delve into the detail of what net zero means for each different sector. And that will then develop, and from those transition pathways, you'll be able to do those skills audits and see where those gaps are. So when you're talking about green skills, kind of in a broad context, it's impossible to delve into the granularity of what those net zero skills are going to look like specifically, because they do look so different in every industry. You know, in some places it will be all about that kind of supply chain optimization, in others it will be about circular economy. Obviously, I mentioned as well carbon management skills, and that's around thinking about strategies for delivering on net zero targets. And again, those carbon management plans will be really important for picking out those skills that are needed, because it will say, okay, so this is our business or our industry. These are the areas we need to work through in order to hit our targets, and therefore these are the kinds of expertise and skills that we need. So I think in terms of and this is in terms of technical skills, they're going to be so different. So we need those transition pathways. But as we've all covered in all of our presentations, those enabling skills are really common themes across these different industries and sectors. And so I think, although they're not those technical specialist skills, they are also super important and just as important. So although they might not seem specific, they are really to achieving that net zero target.
Oh, perfect, thank you. And I think we'll come back in a moment to some of those enabling skills, those transferable skills, and how transferable they really are. But I want to bring us first onto Declan's question that we've got, which is, well, Declan says one of the key challenges that we're finding with research is that everyone knows there are big gaps in future green skills, and we've all recognised that today. But Declan's concern is that most interventions are focused on the supply side at education providers and overcoming barriers. However, Declan wonders, do we need more demand from industry for further education and other providers to make course delivery viable in the first place? And if so, how can we encourage businesses to seek out those green skills at scale and close future gaps? Sarah, I'm seeing you nodding. I wonder if you've got a starting perspective on this.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things we've been looking at EPF is the engagement, again, between government and business. So I think it's come out as a big challenge that, for example, with the environmental improvement plan, business aren't really aware of what it means in practice and how it can be delivered, never mind the kind of what it says in theory, kind of thing. So I think they, in terms of like some of the members of the Environmental Policy Forum and organisations like the Aldersgate Group, for example, have been doing some workshops with business to try and increase that awareness of what it means in practice. So I think partly it's that really the kind of awareness side of things. And I think if we could increase the awareness of what the skills required so that we can actually deliver the environmental improvement plan, so we can deliver net zero, etc., then that'll go a long way to addressing the challenge, really.
Thanks for that, Sarah. And Faustine, do you have a perspective on this as well? I mean, the Green Shoots tackles with a lot of the supply side issues, definitely, but it does talk about sort of the wider economic context as well.
I definitely agree with Sarah, but I think also kind of from the business perspective, policy certainty is really important. So businesses aren't going to want to invest in those green skills and green training opportunities, or even put pressure on kind of further educational institutions to invest in them, unless they have that degree of policy certainty that there is going to be demand for these sorts of workers in the future. And I think one area where we've really been seeing this is around heat pumps and kind of policy uncertainty, leading to businesses not to want to invest in reskilling, and also kind of a lack of skilled labour in the UK that can be used to train existing heat pump workers.
That's definitely right. And there's also definitely a behavioural change element associated with that heat pump conversation, which brings us back to that conversation around soft and social skills. We've got a question from Christine here. Ethny mentioned social skills, which for me are really key, especially skills to influence on behavioural and cultural change. So exactly that element there. But are there any leads to such trainings available in the market? Do we have training already in the market for behavioural and cultural change, or is there a gap?
Firstly, I think there is a gap, and I think part of that is because we've all talked about it today, the kind of siloed nature of a lot of our places of work at the moment, and social sciences and natural sciences and engineering are often the most siloed from each other, I would say, from my experience. There are courses out there. I think people like the Media Trust have worked in areas around communicating climate and climate framing and that type of thing. And I know the Royal Meteorological Society do courses in kind of science communication. So for little elements of these behavioural and cultural change things, there are courses, but I think they are few and far between. And I think you probably do need more developed ones for different industries. And I think key to that will be thinking about how we foster collaboration across the social sciences and the natural and environmental sciences sectors. So things like knowledge networks, knowledge transfer opportunities, all of these types of things are going to be really important, because one of the key barriers to this kind of development of these kinds of courses is communication and kind of a common language between the two of us, because often we speak in very different ways. So creating first those networks and communities of practice will be needed as that foundation to then develop training that can be useful on both sides. So that kind of environmental side of things for the social scientists and the other way around. So I think it's going to be, I think that's what we need first. And then hopefully more of these training offerings will become available.
Great, thank you, Ethny. I think very well said. And keeping us on the topic of some of these specific skills we're talking about, Steve's question is about some of the critical thinking and organisational skills that we've been talking about through the presentations today. Steve says they're often associated with HE graduates at level 4 and above, even though a lot of discussion about skills is very focused on that STEM conversation. So moving us from exactly what we've just been talking about, what should universities be doing to further the green skills transition? And Josh, whilst I know that you don't step into the realm of recommendations, I think there is some discussion of this in the briefing paper about what options are available. So I wonder if you've got a perspective on this one.
No, yeah. So for us, I mean, from discussions with stakeholders, what we heard was it's more joined up thinking, and it's actually having universities collaborate and working with private sectors, public sectors, third sectors, actually hearing from them what the skills needs are and what they're anticipating, sort of what the future of the workforce is and what they are looking for, because ultimately it's very hard for universities to make informed decisions that are then going to have sort of a monumental impact on the future work landscape of the UK, of of the world. So if we don't have that joined up thinking, those joined up conversations taking place between universities, between the government, between industry themselves, then we're all going off on sort of what weird and wonderful tangents. So it is just having these sit down conversations. Again, it also comes back to sort of having that more clear and concise policy outlook as well, and context, and sort of where we as a country are going to be heading. Sort of, I know, especially in the energy sector, so we're talking 2030 is going to be a substantial transformation outlook. We're expecting sort of the hydrogen backbone to be delivered, sort of the energy system sort of for a revamp. And these are two massive sort of cornerstones in our decarbonisation efforts. But again, there's still so many fundamental questions to be figured out, right down to the level of skills. What are these future jobs going to be? How might they then translate and correlate into the existing workforce, the future workforce? So it's having these joined up conversations and dialogues is sort of what we are hearing from stakeholders is going to be key. And also, even when it comes down to the skills and training programs, it is also the public awareness of this, because as we've quite rightly said, they are out there, they do exist. So if there are these short bursts for your social skills, your soft skills, your hard skills, but the awareness level just isn't there right now. And it's not being relayed back to industry, back to universities, because it is all happening sort of in sort of individual sort of workflows. So it's more concise, sort of conjoined thinking and bringing it all together.
Absolutely. Well, I think very well said. And it's definitely one of the themes of today's discussion, isn't it? Is that need for joining up, collaborating and linking up across these things. And it's from that sort of multidisciplinary perspective, I suppose, that this next question comes to ask if we can get into even more of a transdisciplinary perspective. It's another question from Kanan, actually, identifying that maybe sometimes environmental health is very related to receptor level problem exploration, and so very attached to sources at times. But Kanan posits that net zero emissions require mitigation work at source, and therefore, are there other ways that we can get sort of a more holistic perspective into environmental health, or do we even need to, Siobhan? I suppose the question for you.
Yeah, so I think that I would agree to the fact that the classical kind of definition of environmental health is changing, and that we do kind of more so need to focus on delivering kind of successful collective solutions and understanding how environmental health problems arise, like climate change, rather than coming in at the receptor stage and just kind of tackling those. This is kind of primarily the kind of responsibility of our policy team. So trying to ensure that environmental health perspectives can come at the very forefront of policymaking and not being brought in just in terms of delivery and compliance. And that's why a lot of our policy asks focus upon having a chief environmental health officer to include those perspectives at the forefront of policymaking. But within trained environmental health professionals working within local authorities, because we can't yet kind of focus on even receptor level problem solving because you don't have the personnel within that, this additional responsibility is even something that's not really on kind of environmental health professionals' minds day to day or within their teams. And I guess arguably this kind of holistic approach is more of a wider responsibility. I think that kind of bridges the conversation around green skills being more holistic and having that embedded within policymaking rather than it being a responsibility of specific kind of professionals. So I guess for us, it's understanding that, yes, we want to ensure that environmental health professionals can adapt and become a lot more holistic in like developing collective solutions rather than just kind of delivering them, but also understanding that this isn't just a responsibility of these professionals, and it needs to be something that is at the forefront of policymaking when we're actually fleshing out these targets and fleshing out how to kind of respond to net zero and climate change as a whole.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Siobhan. And thank you, everybody. Final question then comes back from me. We've been framing the whole of today around our priorities for green skills. And so I'm going to go back down the panel in reverse order to how you spoke. And I'm going to ask, what's your number one priority? If we create some artificial scarcity and force you to choose, what's your number one priority for green skills right now? So Sarah, starting with you.
So I think I mentioned obviously the three specific asks that the EPF have put together, which is quite hard to narrow down to three asks. But in terms of perhaps the top one, I think from my perspective would be around the prominent role that experts need to take within policy formation and then policy delivery, which has kind of come up quite a lot in the discussion already. But yeah, so I think I'd say that in terms of, we're seeing that consultation with experts at every level is been quite limited. So I think it's just making sure that, like I say, experts are part of every stage of the process, because we're the ones that are having to delivering the policy as well. So yeah, that would be mine, I think.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Siobhan, what's your top priority?
I think in the theme of kind of having that holistic and comprehensive understanding, I think from our perspective, it's having a alignment across policy, business, and the public on what green skills and green jobs are and their importance, and just ensuring that this is kind of felt throughout. Because I think that as you have a rise of public awareness, if business are understanding or valuing what these green jobs are, we're not having those connections. So I think for us, it's kind of bridging those gaps between the importance of green skills, what they are, what we currently have, and where to go from there.
Absolutely. Ethny, what's your top priority for green skills?
Thank you. And I'm going to give an extremely biased answer as communities lead at the IES, which is that I think we need these communities of practice and knowledge networks, given the breadth of green skills and what's required. And as we've all talked about, the need for these systems thinking, holistic, multifunctional solutions. I think it's absolutely essential that we bring people together to facilitate knowledge sharing and knowledge exchange, and help bridge those gaps in communication between disciplines.
Absolutely. For now, Josh, what's your top priority?
I think it's what we've all been saying sort of in this Q&A section as well, is the public engagement and public awareness side of things of what's out there. I mean, it's what we've seen was one of the leading causes of sort of this skills mismatching or sort of lack of understanding or lack of clear definitions ultimately comes with the engagement process with the public themselves, and sort of them not necessarily being fully up to date or aware of what's out there, what we are discussing. So it's having sort of these sorts of events and organizations where we are sort of actually relaying back these messages and sort of beginning to bring them to light, actually make them accessible, make them tangible, palatable for everyone.
Thank you, Josh. Faustine, you started us off. You also get the final word. What's your top priority?
Yeah, like Josh and Siobhan, I was going to say awareness. But I guess something maybe that we haven't discussed this much in the webinar that's been touched on a few times is really the need to diversify the sector. So to make it accessible to people from all different like professional backgrounds, but also lived backgrounds, and to get that diversity of thought, which is going to allow us to tackle what is really kind of a huge and very significant challenge.
Absolutely, and I think a good point to end on as well, as we've got a lot of agreement, but I'm afraid that is all that we have time for. Thank you again for all of your questions. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question, you can continue the discussion in the comments on YouTube after the recording's published, so subscribe to the IES YouTube channel so that you don't miss this or indeed any of our other videos. For now, thank you again to all of you for attending, participating, and sharing your views and questions. Thank you especially to Faustine, Josh, Ethny, Siobhan, and Sarah for setting us up so well by sharing your expertise and for such a great panel discussion. Special thanks also go to Green Alliance for jointly hosting this webinar with the IES. There's an awful lot going on around green skills across the sector. So like we say, we need to be coordinated and we need to speak with one positive voice if we do want to make real change. Speaking for the IES, we've really enjoyed teaming up with Green Alliance on this, and we're always looking for our next opportunity to team up with NGOs, researchers, and other professional bodies. For now, though, that is it from us today. So thank you to everyone for logging in and participating. I hope you found it beneficial and informative. If you are watching the recording on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you have enjoyed today's webinar, please do consider joining the IES as a member. For now, thank you again to Faustine, to Josh, to Ethny, Siobhan, and Sarah. And thank you to everybody for attending and taking part. Hopefully we'll see you again soon.